Thank you so much, and welcome to the Washington office of the National Council of Resistance of Iran. We're going to basically take a look at the upcoming elections, which is on Friday, 26th of February, both the Assembly of Experts and the parliamentary elections, and basically looking at the facts as well as the analysis, what those facts really mean, and what they imply, and also drawing our own conclusions on what really to expect and what the real outcome is going to be. I'm going to, as I said, I'm going to start with the basic facts and move to the analysis and the conclusion. Let's look at the basic facts. We have, the population of Iran is about 79 million. And there are a total of 207 electoral districts with about 1,633 centers for elections. There is a total of 60,000 polling stations in the country. So you can imagine when Tehran takes some journalists to Iran to look at some of these polling stations, how many of those 60,000 they can actually cover. Not very many. And there, just in Tehran province, there are over 6,000 polling stations, and there is a total of 110,000 ballot boxes. Now, by looking at the Assembly of Experts, just a quick facts, basic facts, many of you may know all these facts, is that it's really comprised of 88 clerics who are elected every 8 years. And their task is basically to appoint and supervise the supreme leader. And every year they have two closed-door sessions. No one knows really what they're talking about in those sessions. Probably some of them they don't know themselves. And they are the candidates have to be approved by the Guardian Council. Then they have the Islamic Consultative Assembly, also referred to as Parliament, which is a 290-member body that represents 31 provinces of the country. It elects for every 4 years, and all the 290 seats are up for grabs. And they are in charge of basically drafting legislation, ratifying international treaties, and approving the budget, among a whole host of other things that they do. Again, all candidates are to be approved and screened by the Guardian Council. Now, everyone has heard about the vetting process and how every candidate has to be vetted. I think that's an important thing to look at to see really what it really means. Because it's something that's very unique to Iran. There's no other country that I'm aware that they have this kind of a vetting system, that there is a Guardian Council, and the Guardian Council, whose members are either appointed or approved by the Supreme Leader, are in charge of vetting every single candidate that runs for office, whether it's the Parliament, or it's the President, or the Assembly of Experts, and all of the other positions. And anyone that they deem unfit, they just dismiss them right there. So really, they take away the legitimacy of the elections right there and then, because people really don't have their own choices to vote for. Rather, is those choices presented by the Guardian Council to them. And as I said, the Guardian Council is a 12-member body. 6 of them clerics appointed directly by the Supreme Leader, and the other 6 are lawyers who are recommended by the judiciary, whose head, by the way, is again appointed by the Supreme Leader and approved by the Parliament. And the head of the Guardian Council is Ahmad Jannati. Just to give you a sense, he's been there for the past 36 years. So they really function like a filter, and they dismiss a significant portion of the candidates, and the rejections, it's not clear every time on what basis they're rejecting this person who they just approved the term before. Just look at this year's rejections. In the Parliament, there were over 12,000 candidates who were registered, and out of that, roughly about less than 5,000, 4,722 were approved. That's an approval rate of about 39%. Now they added another 15% later on. That brings it to about 55%. Among those who were in the parliament, by the way, in terms of the Assembly of Experts, only 166 of the over 800 were actually approved. Now, there are 37 current parliament members who were rejected. I mean, these are parliamentarians who right now are sitting in parliament and are, voting and passing legislations and all of that. They were already approved in the previous term by the Guardian Council, and yet they are rejected this time, clearly because of their political leniency had changed and they are no longer fit to sit there. Now, let's look at the past 10 rounds of elections in Iran when it comes to the parliament and how the Guardian Council has approved them. We can look at the approval rate on the right column. Started with 50%. Actually, the first round, really Guardian Council wasn't in place. It was mostly the Interior Ministry, because Guardian Council was officially started its work in July of 1980. But anything after the second round is really their work. And you can see it's, from 80% to 90% approval, and then it went down. You can see how it oscillates up and down depending on the political circumstances at the time. I think this graph may give you a better sense. You can see on the left side is actually the first round of elections right there, and then you have the first round was basically, as I said, it was the Minister of Interior. And then the second and third sessions were during the time that Khamenei was alive. So they weren't really disqualifying that many because it wasn't really needed. And most of those who were disqualified were thank you, that they were the liberation movement members. The fourth session was during a period of open alliance between Khamenei and Rafsanjani against a faction of followers of Line of Imam, which had boycotted at that time. That's why you saw that there weren't too many disqualification, hardly any, because there weren't too many people to disqualify. And then in the fifth and sixth, the fifth session took place when the feud broke out between Rafsanjani and Khamenei. And so on. So all these oscillations back and forth is a clear indication of the political circumstances at the time. Now, in terms of now the question is, how does the Guardian Council really operate? You have 12,000 candidates, and this Guardian Council is only 12 people. How do you really figure out who is who? How do you not make a mistake and allowing someone who's not supposed to be there? So in that circumstances, what they have done in 2001, they set up and later expanded a new organization that really works for them. It's called the Supervisory Office. And it's in all the different provincial capitals or cities and other cities. And they, by 2013, for instance, they had over 385,000 members who were so-called observers of the Guardian Council. These are the people who actually act as the people who advise and provide information to the Guardian Council in different places. Now, one element that has significantly helped the Guardian Council to be able to do the vetting process based on their own standards has been the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. The intelligence organization of the IRGC has been basically the main instrument of them, because the after the 2009 uprising and all the things happened during the uprising, the tremendous outrage by the population, the IRGC felt they weren't really capable of handling the situation. So they formed, in parallel to the Ministry of Intelligence, they formed their own intelligence organization, which they didn't have before. Even though the Ministry of Intelligence very originally, right after the revolution, came out of the IRGC, but later on the whole thing evolved into the Ministry of Intelligence. But after a while, the Supreme Leader realized that they don't have as much control over the Ministry of Intelligence, so they created their own parallel one within the IRGC. It's headed by Mullah Hossein Taeb. He was a very shrewd and arrogant and violent interrogator from early on. He's actually on the sanctions list of the State Department for human rights violations. I think it was back in 2010, if I'm not mistaken, that the State Department designated Hossein Taeb. Now, this the intelligence organization of the IRGC is comprised of 10 different departments. 4 of them are really major, and one is the intelligence gathering, the other one is political office, and then social office and the security office. Now, in terms of the intelligence gathering arm, they have an extensive network of spies and agents organized by the Basij forces. This is where the role of the Basij comes to place. Basij itself is part of the Revolutionary Guards, but their task on the ground in various cities is to collect information and provide it to the intelligence organization of the IRGC, and they gather information from different sectors of the society, from universities, government institutions, to manufacturing plants, to mosques and various cities and districts. And they provide this information that they collect to 3 primary departments, which one of them was political, social, and security. And there is an active relationship during the elections with the Guardian Council, between this, this department and the Guardian Council. And the political department is divided to 3 sections itself. One is dealing with the political parties, all of the different parties that are allowed to operate under the mullahs. And then one dealing with the universities, both the students and the faculty, and the other one is the officials and the managers. So they monitor their own officials very closely to see where they're standing politically, how their political allegiance is changing throughout the time. Now, this qualification process works as such that after the candidates register, the IRGC's intelligence organization starts the work, and eventually, after going through the whole process, provides the recommendations and the file of the candidates. Not just the recommendation, but they provide all the file of the candidates to the observers of the Guardian Council, and that's how the Guardian Council gets all the necessary information they actually need to determine who is supposed to be fit, who is not fit, who is someone who was fit before is no longer considered to be fit. And then therefore, the disqualifications are done based on those recommendations and those files. Based on that, let's see what's been the strategy of what they call the reformists, meaning basically the Rafsanjani Rouhani camp. What they did, their strategy was that, okay, let's go out and register with as many candidates as we can. As you noticed, the number of candidates this time was extremely high, much higher than all the other previous elections. This was largely due to the tactic, the strategy by the Rafsanjani Rouhani camp, and they basically divided their candidates into three categories. One of them, the first category, was really the well-known guys, who are, the usual suspects. Someone who like Hassan Khamenei, who's very well known, and other candidates. And then the second category were the ones who were less known figures, but still known to be affiliated with their faction. And then the third, which they really banked on this group, was basically unknown figures who were given their promise that once we got elected, we're going to work with you, giving promise to Rafsanjani and Rouhani. And hoping that by, giving a large number, and the sieve can always, you can always get things through the sieve. So eventually they will get enough people of their group on the ballot to have some kind of a meaningful impact. Now, the reaction of the Guardian Council has been, except for a handful, they basically rejected everyone from the first category, just crossed them out, and then nearly half of the second category, and really roughly about 1% of what they call the reformist camp. They made it through the initial vetting round. So there are some provinces that there are no candidates left of Rafsanjani Rouhani group, or even any supporters of the government itself are not left there. So really the central policy of Khamenei has been basically to disqualify rival factions through the Guardian Council. And their slogan has been, we want to prevent foreigners' penetration. We want to prevent the rise of agents of sedition. Sedition is the term they use for those involved in the 2009 uprising. And he brought in the IRGC to get heavily involved in this whole process, making sure that at the end of the day, the Assembly of Experts and the Parliament are going to be totally loyal to Khamenei. Now, having said that, let's take a look at what really those things mean. So far, 2 days before the elections, what we can see from this whole process is that the Supreme Leader's authority has significantly been dented as a result of the 2009 uprising, and he's still paying the price for that. And second factor has been the sanctions. The international pressure on the Iranian regime has really been harmful and making an impact. And then the fear of the 2009 uprising has really steered the Supreme Leader in a way that he has to be really careful that not to fall into the ditch of the 2009 uprising, and then not to give too much ground, on the other hand, to the other faction, which he may actually at the end of the day lose control over the situation. So that has been a really difficult and careful steering by the Supreme Leader. And then this whole idea of engineering election results, which we have seen in the previous elections, that's the term actually used within their own regime, among their own inner circles, is that their goal is to preserve the majority. Khamenei's faction goal is to preserve the majority from the parliament, and pushing aside any supporters of Ahmadinejad. He has the scars from the last election, and then the so-called reformist faction, and then basically insisting on to accomplish that, on getting the active participation of the Revolutionary Guards. By definition, by their own standards, by law, the military is not supposed to get involved in the elections. But when it comes to this regime and in this particular elections, they put aside all of that. And I will get to that. And the Supreme National Security Council, which is the highest decision-making body of the Iranian regime, basically handed over the security to the IRGC until June of 2016 to prevent popular uprising, and I'll talk about that. We have a confidential report. The National Council of Resistance of Iran obtained a confidential report from inside Iran that basically says that in late 2015, Khamenei met with the Guardian Council chair, Ayatollah Ahmad Jannati. It was a private meeting that after the meeting, all the instructions that he gave to Jannati, Jannati met with separately with Mohammad Ali Jafari, who is the commander of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, and Mohsen Kazemeni, who is the commander of the IRGC in Tehran, and also Mohammad Reza Naqdi, who is the commander of the besieged forces. And after that meeting, the issue of disqualifications were actually raised, specifically the disqualification of Hassan Khomeini, who is the grandson of Khomeini himself, Ruhollah Khomeini himself. He's the son of Ahmad Khomeini. And this was eventually brought to his own attention, and he personally approved that based on our information to disqualify Hassan Khomeini. He thought this is the one thing, one red line we cannot allow to be crossed. And then he met himself again in late December with the commander of the Revolutionary Guards and tasked Jafari to get involved in a widespread way in the elections. And there are all kinds of quotations by the commanders of Revolutionary Guards. We have it in that booklet. If we can have a copy of that election book, appreciate that. In that, there are all kinds of quotations by the commanders of Revolutionary Guards based on our information. Thank you, appreciate that. I hope all of you have a copy of this. This is a lot of detail. It just came out today. Actually, we're releasing it here. This has a lot of information about some of that internal discussions they had within the Revolutionary Guards, and a task that was given to them by Supreme Leader Khamenei to get heavily involved and make sure that the elections would go the way that they are supposed to go. Based on that, the IRGC has taken over since December of last year, and it will continue until June of 2016. All of the security portfolio of the countries of Tehran completely handed over to the IRGC Sarola Corps, which is in Tehran. And Tehran has been divided to 65 security zones with one specific IRGC unit in charge of each of these zones. And a central war room has been set up under the IRGC command to control the overall security of the situation, clearly fearing that anything as a result of the elections, whether it's the outcome, whether it's the participation, protests, or anything could trigger an unwanted situation that they want to avoid. And the only unit, the only entity that can really protect them is the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, the IRGC. Now, having said that, I want to sum up by drawing the conclusions of what's really happening now. When it comes to the election itself, as we saw, this is a totally sham election. It's been since day one. It has no legitimacy because there's no meaningful representation of the people. People will have absolutely no say in who could get into the parliament or any of the other institutions. It's really the Guardian Council, controlled by the Supreme Leader, who decides, who gets in. Basically, this is a Khalifa system, but in the Khalifa system, you have a Khalifa appointed there. In this case, they give you choice. You know, you want this one or you want that one. You have like 2 choices or 3 choices. In some districts, actually only 1 choice that you choose between. It has the appearance of elections that, you know, it may be looking like similar to what people do in Europe, in the United States, and other countries, but in reality, there is no meaningful choice when it comes to the population. And that's why the majority of the population generally boycott these elections. They don't participate. Even those who participate, they cast their white votes, you know, blank votes. And I saw a quotation from Khamenei saying that, you know, casting a blank vote is religiously unpious. You know, it's against the religion and all of that. So he's trying to do everything possible, all kinds of fatwas, statements to get people to participate, knowing that there's going to be a very small voter participation. There was a statement by the Supreme Leader saying that women, in order to go to the ballot boxes and vote, they don't really need the permission of their husband, which is in sharp contradiction with the prior statements that even if they want to go to the funeral of their father, they need the consent of the husband. So it shows that, you know, they're doing everything to get the vote out. And but having said that, really whatever the outcome of the elections is going to be, whether it's going to be Rafsanjani, Rouhani gaining some momentum, as I saw in some of the media reports today in Iran, they are making promises that maybe by 20%, Rafsanjani and Rouhani faction will gain the upper hand. And then there are some other papers who are saying, no, that's not going to be the case. So who knows, you know, what the outcome is going to be. But as far as the 2 sides are concerned, they have fought nail and tooth to get their own candidates, their own people into these parliaments, because at the end of the day, it's a factional feuding. Who gets the biggest share of the power? It's not about policies. It's not about different, you know, way of thinking. It's about who gets the more influence, who get more of his own people, and by that get more share of the money and resources. Tremendous leverage they get by getting their own people in. We feel that whatever the outcome of the election is, there's really no winner as far as the regime is concerned. The fact that there's more infighting, that would further weaken the regime. And what we have seen in terms of the trend, and I think this is the part that is important for the outside observers, is that contrary to the expectations in the West that after the nuclear agreement, maybe there's going to be a move towards moderation in Iran and, you know, their behavior. It's exactly gone the opposite direction. And Khamenei has intensified domestic repression, dispatched more forces to Syria, and he's trying to preserve his hegemony over the parliament and the assembly of experts. So basically that concludes our briefing for today, and I'd like to have it open for question and answer. Caroline, please.
Given the fact that you consider these elections to be engineered, as you phrased it, what do you think these elections will demonstrate? What will they show you, if anything at all? Are they in any way a referendum on the nuclear deal, or the kind of country it will be, or the economy? Do you see them having any importance or significance at all?
I think at the end of the day, the elections really amounts to nothing more than who really at the end of the day gets the bigger share of power. It's not going to have a major impact in terms of the economy, in terms of how they will proceed with the nuclear agreement, how the overall policies in the region will change. Rather, it's more about who gets the bigger share of power and by that influence and money. Remember that the IRGC controls the bulk of the economy, Iranian economy, and you have foundations, these spooky foundations formed by the clerics who control a huge amount of resources and money and land and properties and everything else. And, you know, basically these are for-profit entities. And neither the Revolutionary Guards nor those foundations pay any taxes. and in total, they control about 2/3 of the economy. So the fight is about that. And who gets more control over these, because if you have a better control over that, then you have a better control over the borders. When there are imports, you don't pay tariff. You can get your own things. The people within your own group can get better deals when it comes to import, exports, and everything else. So that's how we see the elections, that it's going to be basically the power struggle and further weakening the regime rather than setting a whole new course for the future. Any question? John, please.
Since the government feared the 2009 uprising, what would it take for another uprising to occur, especially with the government trying to quell all those fears ever since then?
Well, the 2009 uprising has been in the back of the mind of the supreme leader, everybody else, including people in the other faction, Rafsanjani, Rouhani, and others, because the last thing they also want is the uprising in the magnitude of what we saw in 2009 or even bigger. Remember, in 2009, when the uprising started, in the beginning over the dispute about the election outcome, supposedly Mousavi claiming that he had more votes than actually declared, then his supporters got to the street, but in a matter of hours, the whole situation changed. It wasn't the Mousavi supporters anymore. The rest of the population, most of the people who hadn't even participated in the elections, got to the streets. Things got out of hand. Mousavi and Karoubi repeatedly demanding the people not to go to the streets, not to participate on, for instance, on Ashura Day, which was a huge confrontation between the people and the Revolutionary Guards and the state security forces about 7 months after the uprising started. Yet, things had totally gotten out of hand. So it's in the back of the mind of both factions not to see that kind of a situation. Now, what does it take for that? I think looking at what Tehran fears, what Khamenei fears, and then working backwards. When the sanctions were imposed on the Iranian regime, and there were a lot of hardship as a result of that, that created a lot of anger among the population. Khamenei wanted those sanctions lifted, period. Why? Because that could translate into another 2009 uprising. So the more there is pressure on the Iranian regime in terms of economic pressure, sanctions, all of that, the more it could trigger that kind of a situation. So if you have more outside pressure, that helps the uprising. The other factor they were fearing was the organized opposition. They were saying that those associated with the groups or entities or associations that want total change in the regime. That's where the main target is. They're not really fearful of Rouhani and Rafsanjani. Rather, they're fearful of what's going to happen right after that, basically the population. That's why they're dismissing everyone. And I think for that matter, the more policy moves towards reaching out to the Iranian population, to the opposition movements, through non-governmental organizations who are operating in Iran, but most of them, in an underground manner, student movements, all of that, I think is absolutely crucial in helping expedite the process of change, which we feel is imminent. Another question, please? Yes.
You mentioned the West hoped that the Iranian nuclear deal would incentivize the government to move towards a more reformist tilt. And obviously we have not seen that out of the regime. Is that something, though, that the people were hoping as well? Is this election going to be a referendum on the nuclear deal and saying, yes, we support these more moderate candidates, we support the nuclear deal, or is that not a factor for the population?
It's not a major factor for the population, and I will explain this. First of all, when the nuclear negotiations were going on, the negotiations itself created some kind of expectation, at least, that maybe at the end of the day, something will come out of it. The regime actually succeeded in putting the whole population on pause, saying, okay, we're talking, we're negotiating, we're going to have the sanctions lifted. And therefore, everyone was basically somewhat waiting to see what the outcome is going to be. However, it's been a while since the agreement has been reached, back in July, and some aspects of sanctions have been lifted. They were lifted even throughout the negotiations. Yet there's no indication of either a change of behavior in terms of easing on the population or in terms of economic prosperity. Adding to it the lowering of the oil prices, that this year's budget was based on roughly about $45 of oil per barrel, and it's now what? It's 20-something. It's like almost half of that. So these are major problems that they're facing, and people are basically fed up because they don't see anything, any policies, any measures, any activities on the part of the government. And Rouhani has been in office more than 2 years. None of those promises of economic prosperity has actually been flourished. To the contrary, they see increasingly the regime's hands involved in corruption, and how they are the ones who are actually benefiting from that. I'll give you one example. There is a foundation called Padide Shandis Foundation. It's in Khorasan province. It started there. And it had the full backing of top clerics in Tehran and Mashhad and other places. These are senior clerics associated with the Iranian regime. They had all these ads on television, and they had the clear blessing of the government. And they were saying, okay, invest with us, and we're going to have, you're going to have good return because there's investment in Kish Island. And so a lot of people started putting their money with this foundation, hoping that we get some returns. And they did in the first few months, they did that. And then came the issue of about roughly a few months ago, they announced that there's no money and you're not going to get your money. So that was like $43 billion collected from the people by the mullahs and the Revolutionary Guards, and they're not responding to the population. There are so many demonstrations right now as we speak being organized in Mashhad, Tehran, other provinces. People who have lost all their money and resources are holding the regime responsible. So they feel not only there's no real prospect for economic prosperity or anything like that. To the contrary, they feel that these mullahs, the more money is available, the more the richer they get, and nothing really gets to the population. So in one word, I think this election at the end of the day is really not about vote of the people, building expectations that there are some economic reforms going to come out of it, because they've seen what Rouhani and Rafsanjani has done in the past, and there is no hope for the future. I think we have, is it a question for? Okay, there's a question that was sent on the internet by US News. It says Iran State TV has tried to do town halls in the streets of Tehran. Overwhelming majority of people said the election will not change anything and we will not vote. So I think this is I think the question itself answers it, because there are reports from Iran, as you said in this report, that the people are really shunning the ballot boxes, and they feel nothing really is going to change as a result of this election. Is there any other questions from the internet or from here, from the audience?
Yes.
Carol.
I just have a technical question. You said you estimated that 1% of the reformists got through, but you also said when you were listing the three groups that there's a significant group of undetermined size that were not known as reformists, and you don't know how big that is. So if you don't know how big that is, how do you estimate the 1%?
That 1%, good question. That 1% is actually quoted by one of the it's actually in the book. I can give you the quotation. It's a quotation by one of the top members of the reformists, among the reformists, who, based on what they had seen, estimated that there were only 1% of their candidates there. Plus, we have here a chart here. It's on page 44 of this book. It's basically the different political parties, like by name, and how many people they had and how many actually were approved. This actually corroborates. This is just a rough estimate based on what we have collected information from different places. So that's, there's no official figure saying that they have 1%, but based on our information and based on that quotation by one of the top reformist members, that's roughly the case. Yeah. Please.
If I may, given the number of the polling stations during the elections, do you expect the government figures about the turnout results to be reliable? And also, because the government is so afraid of another uprising, do you think a kind of widespread fraud is possible during the elections this time?
Well, in every election, there is, whenever the result, first of all, elections in Iran is not electronic, and it was just rejected January of this year to the proposal to have it electronically. So it's all by hand, like one by one, you have to count the votes. And it's ironic how very quickly they come up with the results, usually like a day or two right after the elections, they have the results. And what they do, these results, when they collect the results, they all get to a room. It's called the collective election room that's controlled by the supreme leader. And it's there where all the numbers come in, and nothing is announced until an announcement is made by her. Usually they multiply the numbers by 4 or 5 or 6 times, whatever the actual outcome is. Plus, adding to that, all of the cheatings they have, all these people, monitors they have on the ground. One of their main jobs of these besieged forces is, how if they want to cheat in certain locations, this is their job to do it. So election frauds have been there since day one, since the very first election in Iran in 1979, actually 1980, until now. And we expect the same situation to be here. However, because of the balance of power, there are certain limits to these election frauds. And that's why the balance I mentioned. If the supreme leader comes out, regardless of what the voter turnout was, who had voted for which candidates, he would come out and say, this is the list. The danger for that is that the other faction, who pretty much knows exactly where things are, might have a major backlash, and that could translate, as you correctly said, into a major uprising or something in the streets. That's why they need to work within the certain balance. You can cheat, but there are certain limits to the cheating because you have the other faction standing right there. And they have the experience of 2009.
Okay, I have just a few questions from individuals who have submitted online. The first one is from Juban Katirai. He's the Iran Focus editor based in London. The question is, what happens if the Rafsanjani camp can somehow muster a majority in the elections in the Assembly of Experts? And the second part is, do you foresee Iran democratizing following the 26th February elections?
Well, I think the first question was whether Rafsanjani could gain the majority in the parliamentary elections and the Assembly of Experts. Is it possible? Yes, it's possible. Is it probable? In terms of the Assembly of Experts, it's extremely difficult because that's where they have, the candidates are already known. There are a very limited number of candidates. Only 166 for 88 seats have actually been approved. In some districts, there's only one candidate. So actually 11 districts, there's only one candidate. So they pretty much have a sense of where things are standing. It's unlikely that Rafsanjani faction will gain the majority in the Assembly of Experts. However, whatever number they get, if it's a significant minority, that would make a big difference. And that's what I think they're fighting for. The last time when there was election for the Speaker of the Assembly of Experts, Rafsanjani got 24 votes himself, as opposed to, I think it was 46 or something like that, 47 to 24, which is very significant. So he's trying to expand the block of influence within the Assembly of Experts, so he would have more impact on the future, Supreme Leader. And in terms of Parliament, if Rafsanjani's faction will gain momentum there, that would really make things very difficult for the Supreme Leader to proceed in terms of legislations, decision making, and all of that. They want to avoid that. I think if that happens, you're going to see increased infighting, and that may actually open up opportunities because the more infighting you have, the more opportunity it creates for the population to use the crack, the opportunity between the cracks, and that's what Khamenei wants to avoid. He doesn't want the other faction to gain the upper hand.
And the follow-up, do you foresee Iran democratizing following the elections?
Well, in terms of democratizing following the elections, not through the election process, but certainly there's prospect for change because whatever the outcome is going to be, the regime is going to get weaker, and that could create opportunity. Remember, it's not just a 2009 uprising that we remind people of. There's been continuous demonstrations in Iran. Just look at the past 1 year. The teachers were on strike. They were demonstrating. They're every day in front of Evin prison. The families of political prisoners are demonstrating. They're speaking with less fear and more openly. And also students in different universities are demonstrating. Workers who have not been paid are using every opportunity to raise their voice. I mentioned the example of the Padide organization that people, as a result of losing their money, are revolting against the regime. So anything could trigger a situation that could eventually lead to the fall of the regime.
Okay. Another relevant question from Osama Mehdi from the news Alaf in Saudi Arabia. Do you think the nuclear agreement has provided a degree of comfort to the Iranian population, and as such, more people will be voting than in previous elections?
I don't think so. I think quite the opposite. The nuclear agreement has really been a headache itself, despite all the shortcomings in the agreement. It has created a lot of headache for the Iranian regime because it has increased the expectations of the population, which they can't meet. They had to abandon some portions of their nuclear program, which they really wanted to rely in getting the bomb as quickly as they can, because that's one of the 3 pillars of the Iranian regime. And therefore, by losing the ground on the nuclear area, the regime is putting more emphasis on the export of terrorism abroad, and that's why you see an increased involvement in Syria, in Iraq, and in Yemen and other places, but also increased suppression domestically, and that explains why the number of executions in Iran have been on the rise.
Another question from Brian Brinker from the Digital Journal. Some argue that while the elections are controlled in Iran, there's nevertheless competition and people have the opportunity to choose. What is your response to this?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes. Some argue that while the elections are controlled in Iran, there's nevertheless competition and people have the opportunity to choose. What is your response to this?
Well, the response is that the people really don't have the opportunity to choose. They only have the opportunity to choose between the candidates that are presented to them by the Supreme Leader. Remember, everyone who stands for election, one of the main requirements is that they have to have total allegiance to the Velayat Faqih system and the supreme leader. And these are mostly people who have had that allegiance, yet they're being disqualified because they're not 100% or they have some differences with the supreme leader. So even the regime itself cannot tolerate the most ardent supporters of the regime itself. So where does the vote of the where does the vote of the people stand? They have no say of no opportunity to choose who they want to choose to get into the office. Khamenei said once that recently, actually 2 weeks ago, and the quotation is in the book. He said that I want even those who oppose. Who don't agree or oppose the government to participate in the elections. But that doesn't mean that those who are opposed to us should be elected. So what does that mean? He's saying that come and vote because I can take pictures and say there's larger voter participation, but you're not going to get your candidate of choice into the parliament. And I think the whole screening process by the Guardian Council is a testament, especially this recent one, to that fact.
Another question from Aghwar News in Jordan. To what extent do the Iranian people believe in the election under the ruling theocracy? Is there popular support?
There is no popular support for the elections. To the contrary, majority of the population stay out of the ballot boxes. Keep in mind that it's almost necessary for you to have that stamp in your ID when you participate in election. If you want to get a job, if you wanted to get any kind of advantage, if you deal with any government agencies, you need that, even for getting to universities. So they have practically made it mandatory for the people to participate in the elections. Nevertheless, most of the people stay away from the ballot boxes. So that's a clear indication of the level of the sentiment of the population against this election. They don't see any legitimacy to it. They have seen no result in the previous elections. It's not a coincidence that you only have a certain limited number of players who've been around for 37 years. You're always talking about, Khamenei, Rafsanjani, Rouhani, Ahmadinejad. All of these people have been there for a long, long time. There are no newcomers outside of the system who has any kind of opposition to that, and that has remained, this situation has remained the same. So that's why, especially the younger generation of people of Iran are staying away from the ballot boxes.
And one last question here from Mr. Ahmed Oleva. He's a journalist from Jordan. What is your view on the coexistence between the Velayat Faqih, the absolute rule of the clergy, and democracy? Can the two coexist?
They cannot. They actually, the Velayat Faqih in itself is contradictory to democracy because by definition, Velayat Faqih says it's the representative of God on the face of the earth. It gets its legitimacy not from the vote of the people. The supreme leader is not elected by the population. Even the president, which is supposedly elected by the vote of the population after it survives the screening process by the Guardian Council, can be dismissed by the supreme leader. So this whole institution of Velayat Faqih is built based on absolute rule of the Faqih, Wali Faqih, and has no respect whatsoever, and no room whatsoever for the vote of the people. That's why this is the Khalifa system. If ISIS is planning to establish, Islamic State somewhere, the mullahs have established it long ago, from 37 years ago. They have institutionalized the Khalifa system, giving it the appearance of votes and elections and all of that, but in reality, it's extremely repressive and very, very much inner looking, not allowing any kind of vote of the people to have any impact.
Any further questions? If not, I think we'll wrap it up at this time. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you so much for attending. Appreciate that.